The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and I am the one and only Al Warren.
You are, Al. The one and only.
The one and only.
That's right.
I don't know where this should be the last show before my summer break.
Summer break? What are you going to do?
Work.
This show is the only thing that keeps you out of trouble.
It's the only thing that keeps me grounded and keeps me in a regular holding pattern, 5 days a week or 4 days a week over the summer. And this is crazy because I'm still going to be doing things. Well, I've got a couple of big interviews lined up to do live, and
it's great.
That's about it, really. I mean, and then I've, some research, but I'm going to take it easy.
Well, you should.
Yeah, because I'm getting old. I'm getting old.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, well, you wait. Think of today and add 10 years.
No.
Going to get worse.
I don't want to.
Yeah, so life is a horror, not a hooer, a horror.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes, but
sometimes.
Well, speaking of that, we've got a horror author, not a hooer. So now his new book, Wolf at the Door. Okay, and his name is Joel McKay. So thank you for being here, Joel.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alan. Good to chat.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see. We're gonna find out.
We'll see if you hang up. I mean, you're way up north, in innocent Canadian.
Is that still the impression that people have south of the 49th, that somehow this country is like a more innocent, pure version of the lower 48?
Yeah, I think so. I think for the most part, even when the truckers came across and did all that stuff, it was still kind of, oh, wow. It's still, people have that. But, we were talking to a guy a week or two ago, interviewing some guy that out of the BBC that does books, and he travels all over, and he had a really good, I think, opinion about how each country is really like a personality, like Canada, like Russia, China, the States. They all have a personality, and they keep on doing things over and over that fit the personality. And sometimes people get surprised when something like with Russia, that happened here with the war and stuff, that people are like, oh my God, I didn't expect that. And you hear that, and you think about it, like he was saying, but Russia is a person. Think of it as a person and all the things they've done. And if you think of it that way, it's not necessarily a surprise. So I think it's the same terms in Canada. I think that you have so many years of being sorry.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, right? Because I think you're right about that. Like, I think there is kind of some truth to the stereotype, but you get into Canada, and I mean, here's a country that, okay, it doesn't have the revolutionary history that the United States has, and it didn't have a civil war. But, we volunteered to fight in 2 world wars and other wars, not because we were being directly attacked, but because, we thought it was either the right thing to do or we needed something to do. And you got a country here of 38 million people who, suffer through winters every year and manage to survive it and just keep going. And so, as a Canadian, I find it kind of hilarious because you live in the thing and you're like, yeah, I don't know that we're all that nice. I've been all over this country, and I love this country. I don't want to live anywhere else, but I've also spent a bunch of time in the US, and my opinion of the US is man, Americans are way nicer than some of the people I've run into in, different parts of Canada that shall remain nameless at this point in time, but have left an impression on me. And certainly, other places too. So I think you're right. I think there's a truth to the stereotype, but at the same time, you dig a little bit deeper and you find all these layers of things, and you think to yourself, yeah, I don't know that Canada is the way that people think it. But I will say this. the PR, whoever we've got doing our PR for us, that we're some kind of lovely, peaceful country that gets along with everybody. I mean, they're hitting it out of the park, and let's just keep going with that.
Well, but living in both and dealing with both, I think people have humans as a race have issues and things the same everywhere. And so I don't think that's any different. So you can come across a real mean person or a racist or a hateful ogre in any country, anywhere. But it's just, I think it's more about what's more acceptable or what's part of the mainstream at the time, maybe. Americans are also much bigger at selling themselves on everything, Yeah,
I think that's in the DNA. Like that does strike me that there's this fundamental difference when the U.S. decided to, thumb its nose at the Union Jack a couple hundred years ago, that basically wrote a destiny that was something along the lines of, guess we got to do this on our own. So if we're going to do it on our own, then we're going to make it into something, and it's got kind of this entrepreneurial sort of go out and get them kind of reputation around it. Whereas Canada's a country where, we became a country because we negotiated a legal agreement with the empire, and we're born out of that, right? And so we definitely more reflect that sort of subtle approach to, achieving your independence versus dumping boxes of tea into, Boston Harbor and, writing down what we wanted to become on paper.
Yeah. It's a more subtle way. It's kind of that passive aggressive. Now, I think that is a great term for Canada.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the most loving way. It's a passive aggressive.
I think there's some truth to that, though, in the comedy too, right? Like there's this, when you see Canadian comics, there's this, there is a passive aggressiveness to us. There's a dryness to it. And there's usually, like, in between the passive aggressiveness and the dryness, there's like this thinly buried layer of absolute rage. And like, it's in there. Like, if you pay attention to the jokes and you watch it, you see it's like right under the surface, like that person's really angry. They're hilarious, but they're actually enraged, but they haven't found the way to just be angry. So it comes out in like some kind of a, Canadian dry wit or humor, or as you say, passive aggressiveness, right?
Yeah.
So,
then they say sorry.
Yeah, they say sorry, which is the thing. It's totally a thing, and I'll cop to it. If I say sorry at some point in this interview, then there you go. And I'm sure I'll say half a dozen times.
Yeah, it's already come up a few times, right? That's okay, eh?
Hey.
But when I first moved to Seattle, and I was in university and that, I'd be talking, about whatever, and then people would always keep saying B to me, and I didn't get it at first because back in the 80s I'd say A, and they'd go B, and they thought they were being funny because here's this Canadian, in school, and they thought, but that's how they are.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
That's right. Dave can tell you.
I have to admit, I kind of cop to, like, when I would travel down, 15, 20 years ago to visit my mom. She married an American in Idaho, and they moved down there and lived in southern Idaho. And, I'd meet people at house parties and stuff when I'd be down there, and they'd be like, "Oh, what's it like in Canada?" And like, I have to admit, like, I was a bit of a dick about the whole thing. Like, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I mean, we drive on the other side of the road, and some of us live in igloos," and I'd be like, "Oh, really? Right? Like, is that? Oh, yeah. They've got these roundabouts as soon as you go through the border, and it switches you around, and then you got to switch over to the metric system and everything, and just being a total goofball, right? Trying to sell these things. That's that passive aggressive dry wit, right? And then I'd say sorry, once they realize.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I tell them that you have to leave your car parked at the border, and they give you a sled with dogs. or I would do something like, I remember saying, "Oh, we just got color TV about two years ago."
Yeah.
Stuff like, and this is in the 80s, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
But you know what, that really surprised me? I ended up in Portland, and they would believe me. A lot of them. Whereas in Seattle, not so much. But in Portland, they all bought it.
Well, it's not that much further south. So, like, what's going on?
It was enough that I noticed that everybody I worked with in Portland, none of them had been to Vancouver their whole life. And I remember thinking, how weird. You're like only a day you could drive there in a couple of hours, like, well, I guess 5 or 6, but you could drive to there. Why wouldn't you go one weekend in your life? And so many of them hadn't, whereas in Seattle, a lot of people had been back and forth. So
I think that's true of everywhere. Like, I kind of want to ask David the question. Like, it's kind of like that back east too, right? Like, I don't think, even these places that are within a couple hours away, like necessarily everybody is always going to them, right?
Yeah, well, we have, I probably shouldn't talk about Rhode Island because I live in Mass, but I live on the border, and, people in Rhode Island famously do not like to travel, over the border, and they don't like to travel over there's a bridge to Newport that they don't like to go over either. So.
Yeah.
And it's like Warwick isn't too far, but West Warwick is too far. Well, that's the joke.
You get like this though. Like, I know, like, I live up in northern BC, right? It's big area, and like, so I live in Prince George, and it's big area geographically, not by population. There's only 80,000 people in Prince George. But you talk to people in Prince George, and like, oh, have you ever been out to Smithers? Have you ever been up to Mackenzie? No, but they've been to Vancouver, they've been to Mexico, they've been to Seattle, they've been to Los Angeles, but nobody bothers to go any further west or any further north, right? And I remember, like, even the last few years I lived in Vancouver because I was born and raised there. Like, I grew up outside of Vancouver in Burnaby and Coquitlam, which is like bedroom communities. It's like a 20-minute drive. And I was in Vancouver all the time. But when I lived in downtown Vancouver, you weren't going to catch me going east of Main Street. Like, I think you get into these bubbles, and you're like, and your lifestyle is such, and the culture of it is such that you're just like, nah, that's too different. I'm not going anywhere.
Well, I wouldn't go anywhere in East Van. What are you talking about? Even on a sunny, good day, and I was being driven there, I'd be like, no. Oh, well. Do you find Canadian horror to be similar to what mainstream or American horror is? Or, because you've got this book out now, do you find you fit in with what's going on?
I don't know. It's a good question, and I don't know if I fit in. I kind of wrote this thing that I thought, kind of made me laugh, and had no idea whether or not it had a place, had an audience, or anything else. I think there is a bit of that, though. There was a movie that came out in Saskatchewan a few years ago. It's a werewolf too. It's called Wolf Cop, and there's a second one, and it's like this over the top Saskatchewan movie.
Hold on, did you say Wolf
Cop? Yeah, you got to watch it. Like, you have to see it. Joe Bob Briggs did one of his drive-in specials on it, and like, it's just so over the top and awesome and hilarious and violent too, right? And like, I think there is this vein of, Canadian humor. It's happening in the States too, but you're writing horror, you're kind of writing comedy, but the comedy is almost positioned in a way that it's funny in two ways. It's funny in the sense that the joke itself lands, but it's also super self-aware. Like, hey, you guys know that when I'm writing this thing is absurd. Like, we're all in on the joke that this entire story is absolutely ridiculous and absurd, and what's happening right now is just really over the top, right? And I do think that's a theme that's popping up, and I do think that's kind of speaks to this self-awareness that exists, or self-consciousness that kind of exists in Canada and Canadian humor generally. So I suppose it's not surprising that, there'd be some hoser from Northern Canada like myself that would, write something as ridiculous as I've written here. But I'm certainly not alone, and horror comedy is coming out of the US, and it's popping up all over the place now. So, which is nice to see, because it's in my point of view, it's a good entry point into horror, because I think for folks who, don't often like horror or don't think of it, they look at it and maybe it's an intimidating thing. They're not sure how to access it. Maybe they don't want to be scared. And horror comedy is kind of an adult version of Goosebumps. It gives you a step into that world to, have a laugh and not, have to worry about not sleeping at night for a little while, and then decide if you want to go any deeper.
Yeah. I think that in itself is part of what the Canadian part of it is, right? Because in a sense, Canadian itself, I don't think we take ourselves too seriously.
No,
matter
I think
how,
that the national pastime is in, not taking anything, really too seriously, except for, public sector healthcare or something like that. I think we get pretty serious about that. But other than that, you're right.
Yeah, and driving the school zone speed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Things that are very much, rules based or, then, you'll hear about it from a Canadian. But outside of that, we're not too fussed by much.
Yeah, and I think that sort of fits because I've noticed being in the States a lot of my adult life, a lot of Americans don't get my sense of humor, and at times I get bite back from it. You think it's because we're too cutting, or it's a combination of cutting, but also because I don't take it seriously. Like I laugh at a lot of things that Americans think I should be really. Because, in the last years, people get really, really serious about, let's say, their politics or whatever. And I just kind of make fun of it all.
Yeah.
I just, you can be serious about subjects and talk about it seriously. But really, we're on the radio, we're on TV, we're doing media stuff on politics. It's funny.
Yeah.
We're not solving problems. Is what I'm saying by what a lot of people do on talk shows. So I don't know. I just sort of go so far, and then I kind of try to have a little bit of humor with everything because we have some really dark artists and writers and people on the show that have serious subjects, but I've got to have a little bit of humor. Dark humor is kind of good in a way too. I think it's a sense of relief.
Well, yeah, like I would agree with you on that. I think it helps you to deal with things. Like it's, I think I kind of come by it honestly in some sense because it's just kind of the house that I grew up in. Like I grew up in a bit of a dysfunctional house, and I was exposed to things at a young age that perhaps are not ideal. And I was a journalist in one of my first careers, and so that you see a lot of stuff, and when you see a lot of stuff and you talk to a lot of people and you're dealing with heavy issues, you tend to start to get like this gutter sense of humor, right? And you got to be careful about that because you don't want to become jaded and cynical. But I think it lends itself to I don't know if it's scar tissue or an emotional resiliency. Some psychologists out there will be able to better describe exactly what my neuroses is better than I can. But I would say that it lends itself to being able to look at a horrible situation where, werewolves are ripping a family apart at a Thanksgiving dinner and make it really more comedy than horror. And that's exactly what the book is. And it seems to be that I tend to gravitate toward that. My writing generally.
I was going to say that I'd surely like to know who exposed what to you when you were young, where you're writing horror stories like this. But that's a different, Yeah,
that's a whole other topic. That's like, if you got is there still a call-in, personal psychology show in Seattle? Because I'll call in.
Dear Abby.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Well, I was going to say, what possessed you to mix horror with comedy?
Yeah. Do you want an actual answer? Do you want me to dive into that?
Yeah.
I think, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll just talk about like this one, like how did this thing come about? So this thing came about, unsurprising. You guys have probably heard this 1,000 times now because it's a thing, but it's a thing. First phase of the lockdown of the pandemic. So there I am. And, I'm in this situation where my day job is I run a fairly large economic development corporation. It's public sector that it looks after northern BC. It's a fair bit of public money. And, you're trying to figure out as a CEO how to transition a business like that, public sector environment, into, this crazy new mode of lockdowns and nobody can be at work and everything. And that's weighing on you. And I've got 2 young daughters and family, and you're in this little basement office trying to make all this work, and it's all, you kind of look at it, and I'm freezing, because it's still not quite, spring or summer in Prince George in March and April of 2020. And I'm sitting in this office and like I'm freezing in my basement. And I just had one of these days where you're like, this is ridiculous. And you start laughing, right? And you're like, this is off the charts. And I got this idea of, what's the difference between first world problems and like actual problems. And like, because that started to come up every day in my life, because there was like a million problems every day at work that we had to try and solve, and you had to triage it. You're like, okay, is this an actual problem that needs to be dealt with right now? Or is this just something that's annoying somebody, right? So you get good at triaging things, as I think a lot of us did. And then I started thinking about, families, because you're seeing, families starting to come apart and around, all these different issues and everything. And I said, I to myself, this is a conversation to myself alone in an office in a, winter basement room in the spring of 2020. Wouldn't it be fun to, get an ensemble cast of characters together and, put them around a dinner table, and all these people have grievances and with one another, and it all comes out, kind of like a National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation situation, right? But then it becomes something else, and a werewolf shows up and starts ripping everybody apart. And that's kind of this whole idea of, you guys think your petty grievances between, brother and sister-in-law, or husband and wife, or kids, or, father-in-law and son-in-law are actual issues. They're not actual issues. And how do I get that across? And so, lo and behold, Thanksgiving, dinner, 12 characters, stick them around a table. They've all got issues. And then once, the dinner finally hits its crescendo of, absolute insanity, and everybody is mad and it's a disaster and is about to storm out, that's when the monster shows up, and they got to figure out how to work together, which in that first phase of the pandemic, we were all still under this, what seems kind of naive right now, but this idea of working together to get through this. And I mean, maybe if I tried to write this today, I'd have a darker, more cynical view of things. I don't know. But that was kind of the idea. And so it became this 2-act novella, and that's how it came about. There's no doubt, though, that, when it comes to dysfunctional family stuff and the way people get along, that had nothing to do with the pandemic. A lot of that's just stuff I've seen in my own life over the years that we've all experienced with family dinners, holiday dinners that go sideways. I'm sure anybody who's lived, if you've lived long enough and exposed yourself to enough people, then you have probably at some point in time been to a dysfunctional family dinner or a dysfunctional dinner party, right? And I think there's a universal humor in that if you really step back and take a look at it.
I haven't been to a normal one. I'm 60. I haven't seen a normal. The only time I see normal families is on those television shows on sitcoms or whatever. Everybody seems like they're normal.
Yeah, like what somebody's asked this question lots of times, like what is normal, right? Like, I mean,
yeah.
If there is a normal, I've never experienced it. I'm not sure I want to. I don't think it'd be all that interesting or frankly funny. 9 times out of 10, when I'm saying something, whether it's in my day job or I'm writing something, I'm trying to interlace it with humor and make people laugh, because that's just the way I'm wired. That's how I go through life. So, it's normal for me is boring. I'm not interested in normal. I'm interested in really flawed people who are trying to, get through their day.
Boy, you're on the right show.
But
I have to say, okay, first of all, so are you that type of writer that is in the head, so to speak, of your characters? Like, do you hear your characters' voices? Do you see them? Do you what's your experience? Or is that totally alien to you? Because for me, that's totally alien, but I do all nonfiction. Whereas Dave, he's hearing voices 24/7 and doing weird stuff. So he's doing.
They tell me all sorts of weird stuff.
Yeah. And I guess, the answer to the question is probably more like Dave. But to be honest with you, I can't separate, is that me telling me stuff, or is that actually other voices in my head of the characters? I have no idea. I think it probably, it's some mix of the both of them. But yeah, I think the answer is, when I'm writing these, I get enough of a visual or an idea of who these people are that they start to say things and do things that I actually didn't plan. And that becomes really interesting for me, because it's like when I started and sat down to write Wolf of the Door, I had no idea where it was going to end. I knew that all I was really trying to experiment with at the time, if I take a step back and I think about it as structure as a writer, so here's the really boring part, is like, how bad could it get if you put a bunch of people who have history and natural conflicts with one another, but they're regular people, into a scenario together, and they're all sort of have to crash up against one another? Like, where would it go? And so it was kind of like, a mad scientist playing a little social experiment in his head, but you're making the whole thing up. But it doesn't feel like you're making the whole thing up, because you are hearing these voices and they're doing things and saying things that you didn't plan out. Like, I write from the seat of my pants. David, I don't know how you are, but that's kind of how I do it, because if I plan it out, I get bored and I'll never end up writing it.
So do you write the book inside your pants in your seat?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I've got a whole contraption that achieves exactly that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, with your characters, they kind of take over. Have they ever taken over so much that they've kind of rebelled against the plot while you were writing this novella?
Yeah, absolutely. That one, Wolf at the Door, everybody kind of did what I thought they would mostly do in terms of the broad arcs. Some of the people who died were surprising, because I never actually made any decisions around that. It just sort of played out the way that it did. But I do have another one that I'm working on right now. I was doing some writing last night, and I had one of those moments where I was like, I didn't see that coming. And I'm like, no, I have no idea how to deal with this and where to go. And so today I find myself in this situation of like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll have to puzzle through that one. And it's a bit like not being a tradesman and trying to fix something in your house, right? You're kind of staring at it for hours trying to figure out, how does that actually work? And where do I go with this?
Yeah, writing yourself into a corner.
Yeah, totally.
It's always fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're not like waking up in the middle of the night with shovel in your hand or something weird like that, are you?
Not that I recall, but do people who wake up in the middle of the night with shovels in their hand, do they remember? Like, I think if you're at that point, like, are you even aware anymore? Like, that's a whole other question. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, I'm not doing that. And I think, my wife is a lawyer, so a criminal lawyer, and so I'm pretty sure that if things got too far, she'd be working me down to the local corrections facility long before I was ever able to do anything.
Criminal lawyer in Prince George. So what's she doing? She must work the McDonald's drive-through, and there's something like there's no crime in Canada.
Oh, you'd be amazed. It's not that different than the U.S.
But they're more polite.
Yeah, they might be. Yeah, there's definitely some Canadian idiosyncrasies to it. There's no question.
They steal your wallet and then say sorry.
Sorry, I needed your wallet.
Did you guys ever see that video that was online a few years ago? It's not a true thing, but it was a cop car and criminals, and it's called a Canadian police chase. And they're both stuck in snow, and they're both trying to push their vehicles through the snow. And while the drivers are ramming the engines to go forward instead of just stopping, getting out, and arresting them. It's It kind of makes you think of that, right? That's kind of what you think of in Canada.
It's true. It's true. You walk by it and you watch it going on. No, it's not that. Sorry. So I have to ask this because, you're on the verge, you're really setting yourself up to be canceled here, right? Because your main character is Charlotte Deerborn.
Yes.
Now, how can you, as a cis white male, write as a woman? I can see it coming now. If not, I'm going to make sure people, listeners, make sure you come down on him. Are you on Twitter? Get on.
Yeah. I mean, that's how do you even begin to unpack that conversation these days? Here I'll say this in my defense. Like, if I think there are experiences and information that, knowledge that people have from their own cultural backgrounds that I would never try to replicate, right? Like, I just don't know what it's like in certain areas, and I think you're overstepping if you do try and play that card. But I think there are things that are universal in some cases where you can get, as an artist, you can get enough of an understanding of it that you can roll the dice and try it. I am a big believer in art that you create what you feel like creating. It's free, and it's up to the audiences in the world when you have the gumption to put it out there to decide whether or not it actually flies and it's real. And so I think it's less about rules, at least for me, of what you can and you can't write, and more about your own ability, your own knowledge, and harnessing that and then putting it out there. And if you've got the guts to put it out there, then you should have the guts to deal with whatever the criticism is, good, bad, or ugly. And if you pull it off, then at least for me so far with this book, I haven't had anybody come up to me and say that really didn't sound like what a middle-aged female spouse would say in this situation. Nobody said that to me. They've always thought it was pretty darn hilarious and kind of worked. And I will say, I mean, she saves the day in this particular case. So she's the one who's actually got her stuff together, the entire story. So maybe that helps a little bit. But that's kind of my view of it. I think you've got to be careful about setting rules and guidelines around how people create art.
You should have used a different writer's name, like Jody, one that could have been a man or a woman.
Yeah, yeah.
And plus this thing, you see, because the truth is, if someone, it's not going to be a reader that comes after you. It's not going to be somebody that reads Wolf at the Door and goes, oh, I don't know if this doesn't sound like a real woman here talking, or something. You're not going to get that. You're going to get someone that looks at it and goes, how can this cis white male be writing about as Charlotte? That's what you're going to get. They're not going to be really judging you on what you actually wrote. They're going to be judging you on the appropriation of a woman, so to speak.
Yeah, maybe so, right? I mean, maybe I've been lucky so far because nobody really knows.
Well, we'll make sure that, come on.
Yeah,
LA,
I mean, you guys are going to, this
yeah.
becomes the experiment. Once this airs, you're like, well, let's see how this all works out for Mr. Joel McKay, right?
Yeah. You'll be, if you weren't so far north, they would chase you down. If you were in LA, they'd be knocking at your door and picketing and outside with a loudspeaker. But no, that's too far. And plus it might be too cold. By the time they get up there, it's going to be winter again. And
yeah, they can find me on Twitter, right? I mean, that's where the fight can be had.
Well, did it even cross your mind to be politically correct in this, or to even think about that, or does that even come up when you put together a book?
It does, but it did in a different way for me. I'm very conscious of, I don't know, maybe it's being a journalist, but it's also the old axiom, write what you know. So, like I try to write from the experiences I've had and the experiences of those people who I understand well have had that are close to me, that I think I can create a facsimile of that rings true and, brings an audience along. So that's kind of how I look at it. But I am cognizant of these things, not because I'm necessarily fearful, though I am aware of what the social constructs and conversation is these days. But I have another side of my whole life that was really difficult for me around even publishing this under my name, which is that I'm a public sector employee in Canada. I assume it's the same in the States. I'm not sure, but in Canada, when you're a public sector leader, and in my case, in a fairly senior role, the typical approach has been to be quiet, to not get your name out there, not have an opinion about anything, and be that professional public service. And for good reason. I understand that. And so I was quite fearful that when I published this under my name, and I actually thought before it came out, I thought, maybe it should be a pen name. And I talked to a few people about it. And at the end of the day, I ultimately decided, no, this is me. People are more than one thing. People have to accept that there's nuance, and if there's consequences for me, then I'll accept those consequences, and I'll just try to handle it with whatever professionalism I can muster and try to separate the two, or at least hope people can see that I've separated the two, or I'm not using one to benefit the other. So I did ultimately decide to publish it under my name, and actually the reception has been very, very positive. I haven't had any negative consequences. But to answer your question, I was really alive to that. And that was my fear, was how's this going to look? When suddenly, not only did you come out writing a book, like if I'd written a history book about British Columbia or, economic policy in British Columbia over the last 100 years, which is kind of, related to my day job, then I wouldn't have worried about it. But here I come flying out the door. Nobody knows this about me. And I'm writing, this is a horror comedy about, a dysfunctional, family dinner at Thanksgiving. And by the way, it's set in Prince George. And by the way, there's a werewolf and it gets ugly. So far, so good. We'll see where this kind of all goes. I could be unemployed very soon and calling you saying if you need an assistant for your radio show. Who knows?
Well, I think that if you become popular through this, I think you have far more, terrifying things to worry about. Like, we found some of the most amazing pictures of you doing some of the craziest things online. So I'm sure I would be far more worried about the graphic material out there.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Book, I mean, right? Wait until they unroot the truth of Mr. Joel McKay and what he's up to in the dark hours of the night, right? It's all right there in Google.
Yeah, I didn't realize wolves had sex like that. But that's a whole new, wow. I thought I was a modern guy, but.
Well, you did say you're 60, Al, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. I still go to the wildest places when I can. So, but things are changing. I'll tell you, and they all call me sir now.
Well, there you go. So my question to you is, when you hear that, does that make you angry, or do you feel like you've earned it?
Neither feeling. I just kind of think, what, sir? What does that mean? Sirloin of beef. I don't know what that means. Like, sir? Excuse me, sir? Sir? Like, that makes no sense. Call me werewolf. That makes more sense.
There you go.
No, I just, it's not fitting. That's all. I don't deserve the respect.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know you well, but you're doing this and you survived this, so maybe you did.
I know. I keep trying, but they will not cancel me, and I don't know how much I try.
Well, and again, this kind of comes back to the conversation, not to beat a dead horse here, but to be honest, look, everybody's got opinions, and when you sit down and you have a drink with somebody, it doesn't matter what walk of life they come from. If you're a decent person, you can find no matter where they're coming from. Usually, if you're just having a beer one-on-one, you can get along with most people, right? I think that's generally the experience. And so, the thing that I think about these days so much is, amidst all the vitriol that is going on, we got to find a way for people to just get back and have reasonable conversations and realize we're all flawed, and that you kind of got to find a way to still have a conversation and work past our own flaws, our own inadequacies, or lack of knowledge to try and get somewhere constructive. Because at the end of the day, what is everybody trying to do here? We're all just trying to get on with our days. We're all trying to get a decent night's sleep, trying to, have a decent meal and not be probably bugged too much. Maybe that's a very Canadian view of things. But, I do think for most of us, doesn't matter where you are in the world, that's the truth. And that's kind of that, if I had any political rant, it would be to get back to that. Let's get back to some reasonableness. And maybe I think, absurd werewolf humor is kind of a pathway there. And I'm probably 100% wrong by that. But I do think humor kind of does start to unlock doors.
No, I totally agree. Because anytime I meet people that totally with that, or they're not necessarily people I would want to move in with, but they're people that are different, and most of them I can get along with quite well. There's very few times you can't, but that's being personal or being online. Online, you're not personal with people, so it's you don't know them, and it's easy to look at something and say something, and people get into all that sort of stuff. And I'm more interested in things that are not political. So I guess, I don't know. I don't get into it because for the most part, it's all silliness. It's all silliness.
Yeah. I kind of start to feel the same way too. I find as I get older.
Well, people need to be more real. If you don't like in your case, if they don't like Pierre Trudeau, then they say, well, he's terrible. I don't like this and I don't like that. And why doesn't he do this and whatever? Instead of saying, he's Castro's son and he's a Muslim and he's, eating baby pizza or whatever. It's just like with Clinton and if people get into all this weird stuff, and it's like, look, just get back to normal. If I want to hear about weird stuff, I'm going to read Joel McKay's book.
Yeah, absolutely, right? But I'm with you on that one. At the end of the day, why do we have to invent all these weird things in our reality around that? I've always wondered of this question around apocalyptic fiction. Why is it that humans are so obsessed with this notion of the incoming end of the world, even though we have no evidence that it has ever occurred or will ever occur? And part of me, the dark humorist in me, has always kind of had this idea rolling around my head that it's just our own obsession with trying to make our time alive more special than it really is. And that if you believe that the end is nigh, that you're on the precipice of the end, and thus this is a very important time, and thus everything that everybody does is really more important than it is. Whereas if you just accept that, you're one of 7 billion people and you're trying to make your way in the world, and you're eventually going to pass away and people will forget about you from 3 generations from now, it kind of takes the air out of your sails a lot, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And so I kind of, I liken that to these conspiracy theories. Like they do feel a bit like we're, people drumming up, to some extent, a fairy tale to add some meaning where there doesn't need to be meaning. And what we need to get back to is just saying, hey, how are you? How's things going? How can I help? Practical solutions, carry on. And if you're not interested in those conversations, then, talk about, like you say, talk about other things you are interested in. In this case, in this particular hour, we're talking about, werewolves in Canada for some ungodly reason.
Yeah. No, and it's true. I think that these horror, that's the big rush for horror and the end of the world and all this stuff. I think it's kind of, even the superheroes, isn't it, in a sense that things are, in life become very unsure. People get very scared at times or nervous. And I think it's about lining up good with evil. Like, this is the good, this is the savior, this is the evil, this is the bad. We got to stop the bad because the world's ending and we got to have the good. Like, it's kind of this superhero sort of thing. So either you're painted as Satan or you're painted as the, God or a superhero or someone that's going to do the right thing and all. It's kind of this black and white sense, and werewolves and cell phones and all these evil things that are there we have to be watching for. So I think you're, in a sense, that's right. And I think having a comedy, and I think having a lot of this, because look at all this stuff, like do you like current horror yourself? Like,
I do. Yeah, I do. It's, I read a fair bit of it. But I it's like anything, like I like Marvel movies, but I don't like every one of them, kind of, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm just overdone with it. That's all. There's too many. Personally,
you're not the first person I've met who said that. I still like them, but I get it. Like, I get when I hear that from like a friend of mine. He's like, I'm done with the whole MCU thing. I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. Right? I'm not there. I still enjoy them, but I don't enjoy all of them.
No.
And it's like,
I think I can sit it, but I just don't. I'm not. If one comes out and it's at the theater, I mean, I have no problem waiting until it's streamed.
I'm the same way.
Thing. I'm not like dying to get out, waiting in a lineup to get into a crowded theater to have some kid kick the back of my seat while I'm watching, some,
I'm right there with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Dave still goes. He waits in lineups and gets out every chance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Dave, he's psychotic. He's right into all that,
Yeah.
Horror superheroes. Yeah. Rocky 18.
Rocky 18.
That's crazy. What do you want people to get out of your book? Someone picks up Wolf at the door. What is it you hope they take away from it?
To be real honest with you here, like, all I've ever wanted to do in my life is write stories that people would come away with at the end of it and say, that was a ripping good yarn, Joel. I enjoyed myself, and then carry on and get on with their day. That's it. That's all I want to do. I'm not here to actually say anything meaningful. I'm not here to, pass on, be the next great literary hero. I like pulp stories. I like stories for entertainment. I think there's value in that. And so if I Wolf at the Door is 129 pages, and you can probably read the darn thing in 2 hours or thereabouts. And if at the end of that 2 hours you say, yeah, that was a page turner, that was pretty entertaining, Joel, thank you, then that's all I'm in it for. Are there deeper themes and stuff that I've buried in there, like some video game programmer who's buried a secret Easter egg or code in there? Yeah, there are. But that's not actually. I wasn't trying to say something grandiose with it. I was really trying to test myself as a writer with an ensemble cast to do something a bit different and make it interesting, entertaining. And if I get a reader who says afterwards, yeah, that's not Tolstoy, but it was bloody funny, I'm like, yes, score. That's what I was after.
Well, speaking of funny, they say for like stand-up comedians and stuff, to land a joke, you need comedic timing. And I'm just wondering if you feel there's maybe a timing or a flow that's necessary when you're writing humor in prose.
I think there is. I would not pretend to be an expert in it, but I think there absolutely is. I think you can feel when you're writing, especially when you're writing dialogue, because that's typically where the humor is going to be, is a cadence to things. And I feel that, I don't know that, but I feel that as a writer, if you understand your characters and if you've painted them clear enough for your audience, and your audience is following along, and then they start peppering each other back and forth in a conversation, it can get pretty funny pretty easily, pretty quick. But it's in the cadence, and it's in the setup, right? Like you have to have articulated who these people are in the situation that they are currently in, how they talk, their idiosyncrasies, and if you set that all up, then you can land jokes pretty repeatedly, and. That to me seems to be the way to do it. But I would tell you, and this is kind of the weird thing, like if somebody said to me, oh, Joel, there's some funny parts in Wolf at the Door, why don't you write stand-up comedy? No way. I think that's the hardest job in the world. And I wouldn't even know where to begin. And so I do think they're different, and I think you don't need necessarily as much skill to do it in long-form prose as you do when you're standing alone on a stage in front of an audience of people, right? It's a different thing. But I could be wrong about that too. That's just how I feel about it.
Wow. So do you is this book Blood and Guts, Solid Fear, or is this more suspense with the comedy?
Yeah, it's 2 acts. It's suspense. So the first act is the setup and the dinner with the characters. The second act is when the werewolves show up and when everybody has to come together, whoever's left surviving, to figure out how they're going to get through the night. So it is more comedy than horror. But it is most definitely horror when it kicks in. And there are, even in that first act, there's a fair bit of foreshadowing that something is coming. And I gotta say, I haven't been, the werewolves are incidental here. I have not tried to hide the fact that this is a book about werewolves. It says on the back, and then a werewolf shows up, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And on the front, there's a picture of a werewolf, and in the title, it says Wolf at the Door. I've never tried to hide it. And that was very intentional. I didn't want to hide the monster. I wanted the monster to come out sooner, because sometimes in horror I'm frustrated when they spend, the creator spends 3/4 of the time, teasing what this monster is, and then you finally get a look at what it is, and you're kind of let down. I knew that it's just a werewolf. This is a Universal movie style werewolf from the 1950s. Let's just get it out front. That's what this thing is. But let's make the characters and their relationships more interesting with one another. So it's not slasher all the way through. More comedy than horror.
Yeah. Well, I understand that. So now, are you doing social media? Do you have a website? Where is there a place that people find Joel McKay, like Tinder, Grindr, anything like that?
Neither of those places. But you can find me on Twitter at Joel C. McKay. And I am dabbling into Instagram, so author Joel McKay. You can find me on Goodreads, LinkedIn as well. Those would be kind of the places. I will not say I am particularly good at social media. I don't know what you guys are like, but like I've got this complex relationship with social media where like I know I got to do it, and sometimes I enjoy it, but there's this other part of me that just feels like the whole thing is kind of like, you know, a waste of my time, and I'd rather just be writing. So I'm trying to get better at it. I'm not naturally good at it.
No, and I don't. You know, I'm not. But what I've done is I've kind of made it part of my early morning. The first thing I get up with the dogs, and then I do the social media, and I just kind of put out what. You know, who's on the show tonight, or if I'm writing something, I'll put just the basic information, and I do it on all platforms. And I always throw out a really nasty joke sort of thing, try to make people laugh, because the idea is to have some fun in life. So it's to make someone laugh or unfriend me, and then and that's it. Then you can kind of walk away, and then I go back to it every once in a while just to update something. But I just do it every morning, and then it's kind of regular. And I think that's all you need to do, because then if you have someone following you that likes to read your stuff or see your stuff or whatever, or know if you're going to be on a show or something, then they kind of because they'll check it when they check it, and they say, oh, look, Joe's on House of Mystery, I'm going to check that out.
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, stuff like that. So you just make it part of your, like you brush your teeth, hopefully. And then you do like 20 minutes with all the platforms. You just throw a little bit of something out there. Get on TikTok, dress up like a werewolf and start dancing.
Now I got to brush my teeth too? Like,
well, I know, but one step at a time. You know, let's start with the teeth, because really.
Yeah, let me start with the teeth. I'll get those cleaned up. Then I'll consider the TikTok with the werewolf costume and the...
Yeah. Well, just think about it. Werewolf mask, then you don't have to wear any clothes. Then you can just dance around and just think, boy, you'll get thousands of views.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure a pink slip from my board.
They are not going to know it's you. How are they going to know it's
you? They'll know. It's a small province.
Oh, they've all seen it before. Well, listen, there's now we come to the end of the show, but there's the last. This is the hot seat question, the most important question of the night, the day, whatever. Now, the turkey that was carved, male, female, or what?
Okay, so I'm going to cop to something. I don't even know what gender a turkey normally is when it's served in Thanksgiving. This question never even popped into my mind when I wrote it. You're the first person to ask it. So I would say the turkey can be identified or interpreted however the audience would like. I have no answer on that.
Schrodinger's turkey.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Schrodinger's turkey, yeah.
Well, you know, see, that brings the question, you see, like, what is a turkey? When you're about to eat it at the dinner, do you even know if it was male or female?
Do I even know that it was a turkey? Yeah. I didn't see it get slaughtered or
no?
You know.
Maybe.
So turkey.
Maybe it's just a really big chicken. I have
That's what the chickens look like in Prince George.
Yeah, there you go. Move up north. The meat's good.
Oh, see, we can leave it on that.
There you go.
The meat is good. And you're going to find out when you watch Joel on TikTok, okay? So when he gets going, and you'll find out how good the meat is. So anyway, today we've been talking about The Wolf at the Door. And Joel McKay has been the guest, and we'll have everything up on our website. So thank you for being on the show.
Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to both of you.
Thanks, Joel.
Tired of wasting time trying to decide what to watch on your streaming service? Go to our website and look for the Martino movie reviews.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.